All worship the King, all glorious above, and gratefully sing. His wonderful love, our shield and defender, the Ancient of Days, pavilioned in splendor and girded with praise. That's an oldie but goodie, but it's good to listen to the words of some of the oldies but goodies, like listening to the words of a good old Shakespeare play, if you can still read them. Oh, worship the King, all glorious above. All worship the King, all glorious above, and gratefully sing of his wonderful love, our shield and defender, the Ancient of Days, pavilioned in splendor, and girded with praise. Whose praise? Are you praising that King that's coming? The King of Kings? It's coming to rule for 1,000 years? Are you really? Are you trusting in the doctrines of men that make sons of hell? How sure are you that you are on the narrow road that few find, to be raptured, as in caught up into the King's kingdom? You see, raptured is not that magical trip into heaven. No, heaven's coming to earth, silly. That's why the Lord's Prayer is, "Thy will be done on earth as it is and has always been in heaven." And it probably was on Eden for a little while anyway. So, things are getting a little chaffy. In fact, very chaffy in Wheaties land. Just like the cereal that used to actually make you strong now clogs you up with poisons. It's almost like they could just put Caitlin on the box instead of Bruce of old with gold medals. You see what I'm saying? We need to be real Wheaties of old. Wheat, solid, like organic style wheat for the King who's coming to reign. So, if you want to get divided in the doctrines of men that make sons of hell, we could look at many books. We can look at the Book of Mormon. We can look at the J.W. Bible. We can look at the John MacArthur Bible. We can look at the Covenant Bible. We can look at the Orthodox version. We can look at the Pentecostal oneness movement. We can look at many, many things. But these are all different doctrines of men that make sons of hell. This right here is a habit that I seem to enjoy, maybe a little bit much sometimes. But I talk to my King about it, see? And he tells me not to worry, because he's got a new body for me. if I do his will and promote his kingdom, his grace is sufficient for this, what may be a thorn in my side for some, or maybe a pleasure I don't want to take too far for others. But what I'm trying to say is that it should not divide us. Because if I choose this, and God blesses it, and the king comes and says, well done despite of it, who are you again to tell me that this is evil in your sight? If there's a fire that burns in my soul that cannot be put out with these, then please don't point your finger at me and call this evil in your sight, because my king is with me, and I'm not looking for you to adore me. Thus I'm trying to shine light in this dark and show you that you are in a very dark world in 7 seas of lies, doctrines of men that make sons of hell, that have been trying to hold on to their 4 walls that are dens of thieves. They've been dens of thieves for years. And in Revelation 2, the king comes, and he comes to the church. Just before he tells the church, come out of her, my people, as in the whore of Babylon. So before he does that, he goes to the church, and he talks to the lukewarm ones, and to the others who left their first love, and to the others who he hates, calls the Nicolaitans, and to the others that he calls the synagogue of Satan. We have quite a few here, and they're under a princely reign, which we've been under for quite a few days now. Or years. So, are you ready to be sure you're on the narrow road that few find? The road in which the king comes and picks you up to be a part of his kingdom? Not to be going into some UFO to a rapture land of a dream that some preacher put in your head. There was actually a doctrine of men that made sons of hell. And you, who trusted that pastor, didn't know the God who's bringing the king. You knew another God who was a princely reign. You see, that angel of light is not always the right angel if you don't check it right. So, double check your source to see who you're really praying to. Because if you give the wrong signals with a puffed up heart of pride, thinking that you're so deserving of this grace you call divine, well, you might see how that golden rule applies. And that grace doesn't look so pretty if you've been following the self-serving egotism side. that doesn't have much golden rule in it. So, if you start thinking a little more simply about how you love God and love your neighbor, then maybe when the king comes, you might be sure that you are not one of those parts of the church, so-called, who aren't making the king so happy. Because making the king happy would be pretty important when many will come in that day and say, Lord, Lord, in your name, I trusted John MacArthur's rapture theory and his saved by grace theory and his lordship theory and his master's seminary doctrines of men. Or, Lord, Lord, I trusted the Book of Mormon. Or, Lord, Lord, I trusted this. No, you see, there might be Mormons that are more saved than many Christians, or so-called Christians and so-called Mormons, you see, because if they follow the Book of Mormon like some of the Synagogue of Satan follow the Talmud, well, that's not the king. Because the king didn't go to Guatemala. He went somewhere to be king, and they killed him, and now many are deleting him. So, if you are part of one of these churches that loves to talk about Jesus saving by grace, well, you need to talk to that pastor about the king who's coming that all will bow down to, and whose kingdom's coming to earth. And if he's trying to get away from this earth, well, that might be that angel of light who's not really from above. He's from the dark side, but he appears like an angel of light ever since he fell from, Lucifer and become called, the devil. So if you just make sure that you are with the king and not with a fairy tale that makes you feel so special, just remember that grace is all about being poor in spirit. And if you can't even follow the golden rule, how do you expect the king to look at you and say you are his servant? So think simply and stop looking at others through your Pharisaic eyes, thinking that you have made it. And you are one of the few. Because if you don't realize that the narrow road you're on might be pretty wide, filled with many others with strange beliefs, just remember that the remnant in Revelation 7, with all of these tribes, could be people that might be Mormons. They might be Jehovah's Witnesses. They might be Buddhists. They might be Muslims who Allah is a Son of God King they are looking for? What if it's just Jesus with a Muslim name that we don't quite understand? And if we are know-it-alls supporting killing all these radical Muslims, and they are our brothers, then who is your king? Maybe you should be aware of what's really going on, and how many princes are trying to reign right now, and how that only one king is coming for the entire world. And if some tribal hunter looks up to a moon god for king, that he's always prayed to, and sees Jesus coming and prays to him and bows to him, who are you to say he's not saved? Why don't you leave these things in the omniscient one's hands, since he created us all and said that we all came from Adam and Eve and Abraham, which would mean that we're all part of the sands of the sea and the stars of the sky. So who are we to say who's who and what's what? But if you really do pray and worship the King and follow the golden rule and love God right and your neighbor as yourself, well, what would you have to worry about the King who comes and says to many who come to his name and say, oh, in John MacArthur's name in the Book of Mormon? No, it's not about that. It's about getting ready for the coming King. Now, I have seen messages left by JWs who I know are JWs because of the way they talk. But there is more love for their neighbor in their speech and their care for their neighbors that read their messages. And all they're saying is repent and get ready for the King who's coming to rule on his kingdom on earth for 1,000 years. And if you don't see truth there, because you think JWs are a cult, because they base too much on works, when Jesus said that if you love God right and love your neighbor as yourself, that would summarize all the law and prophets. Wouldn't that mean that there's some works involved in this saved by grace idea? And that sola scriptura isn't quite enough? You see, some of the doctrines of men love to read the beautiful Sermon on the Mount, and they love to say, that would be a beautiful thing if you could be poor in spirit, and thus yours would be the kingdom of heaven. But that, of course, is impossible in this day and age, so that would only be possible in the kingdom. But if that's the payment for how you lived this life in the kingdom he gave you, which is your life, and how the talents that he gave you, which would be what you can do, and maybe even how you can live, despite your habits, whatever they might be, if you can talk to the King about them and still know him and not be one that boasts about your might or your great wisdom, but you boast that you know and understand the King who's coming and the Father who's highly exalted him and given him a name above every name, so that at his name every knee will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is King of kings and Lord of lords, to the glory of God the Father. And yet, now, most pastors that I ever hear have deleted the words King of kings and Lord of lords into the glory of God the Father from all their messages, or any end times talks, or any kingdom to come, like the Lord's Prayer. So how hard is it to find this narrow road? Well, it's a rough road, you know. It's not an easy road. It's not just about trusting this little doctrine, or this simple little prayer, if you just accept him. Well, you see, he's the one who says, many will come in that day and say, Lord, Lord, in your name I did this, and I trusted this, and he will say, depart from me. I never knew you. Because you see, there are many people with great faith in many things right now, but I don't think there's that many that have great faith in a king. Especially when some people think that the king has decided to give his rulership to some people and not himself. You see, if he did that, then there wouldn't be a rapture where he caught you up to serve in his kingdom, as in mayor, governor, and all these things. So the narrow road would be to serve your king in every way he might tell you to. But in order to tell you, you have to listen to him, and that would mean you have to talk to him. You have to spend time, like, actually telling him what's in the pit of your heart. And that takes digging and admitting, yes, Lord, I did smoke quite a few of those cigarettes today. Help me not to do too much of it, because I do enjoy it too much sometimes. And things like this. But it's not in to say, thank you, Lord, that I never smoke, and I'm like these bloody smokers killing themselves with these bloody cigarettes. No, that would not be love, you see. We need to understand what makes a wide road and what makes a narrow road. Because we've had finger pointers for many years. But the king was never much of one of those, except for those preachers. And those preachers were blasphemers, which might be the beast mark that starts in the heart. Because if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit and he leaves you, well, he's not really coming back, you see, because you already stopped listening. Because we have plenty of know-it-alls already. And if you're not spending time worshiping your king, but trusting one of these pastors who are so good at being men who speak with many words or pray with many words, so they will be known by their many words, but that's not how we were taught to pray. But to tell him what's in our hearts. So, if you want to be on that narrow road and be a part of the one that's with the king when the whore of Babylon is removed, and not be one of the ones with the whore of Babylon when the king comes and says, come out of her, my people, I think that would not be the one that would be on the narrow road already. So it's always good to get your sights set on the right road. If you'd like to double check which road you're on and make sure you're on the right road, and that I'm not just saying this off of the top of my head, which many people have been accusing me of lately. But of course, I did study the word. I didn't go to doctrinal theology courses. I did study it for many years. I don't remember how many, maybe 30 at BSF. If you look it up, you'll find it's a quite reliable interdenominational Bible study, so you don't get stuck in the doctrines of men that make sons of hell. So, what I'm trying to tell you is that to prove all these things, all you have to do is read the entire book of Matthew, but if you want to make it brief, read the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew 5 through 7. If you follow these simple things that Jesus said for us to do, you will be quite clearly on the narrow road. And if you listen to it again and again, you might actually get hypnotized. If you haven't yet got too yeasty from the yeast of the Pharisees, which is a dangerous thing to do, because some of these Pharisaic-type teachers, well, they're good at drawing you in and selling you in these seas of lies and waves of doctrines of men that make sons of hell. And they soon might be salty pillars surfing on those seas of lies as they all dry out with the fish they've killed with all the poisons and lies and fake salt. So it would be good to get away from the falsies right now while there's plenty of time. Well, I don't want to say plenty, but many people around me tell me there's plenty. But I like to think that the time might be short, because it feels like we really need to be ruled by a king. So the narrow road is hard to find for some and hard to understand for others. But if you went through Matthew 5 through 7 and put it over and over again into your head, you might start becoming a lover of the king, a thirster for righteousness, and a poor in spirit servant who loves God right and his neighbor as himself. So then you might talk to the king with your whole heart, not just part. Because part hearts, well, they might be parted pretty roughly quite soon, you see. Because if you want to understand what's coming real quick, then start with 1 Corinthians 3 to see how he will show us how he thinks of what we've done as he passes all our works through the fire. And that's when we will hear, well done, or, wow, would you like to clean the streets? You see, it's all about getting right with the king and knowing who he is and what he's coming to do. Because there is this great cloud of witnesses you see in heaven. And many like to say that they're the raptured ones that are going and coming back later after all the ugly stuff is over. But no, that would be 72 million that were aborted and forgotten, but not by the king. And he's bringing them in his kingdom on this earth, where there will only be naked truth and gold. And so, it's not really that hard to understand how to get off the wide road if you're not yet too beastly in your heart. Because pride swelling in your heart, whether it's through the doctrines of men that tell you, say by grace, or the Book of Mormon, or the blah, 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 whatever it is, if it's not truth, and you're trusting your four-walled church, beware, because on that narrow road could be some Mormons who trusted their king more than they trusted that Book of Mormon. And there could be some Jehovah's Witnesses who trusted that king to come, even if they thought he wasn't deity. And there may be some Buddhists who trusted a Kama king more than some of those Christians who trusted saved by grace doctrines. So, how do you really know that you are on the narrow road and not a wide road you think is narrow, but it may be taking you to an ugly planet? Because according to your faith, it will be given you. And if you never talk of a king or ever look to your king,